Welcome to More Than Miles, the podcast created to look deep into what it means to be a runner and endurance athlete. Our episodes are filled with real stories from real runners, elite to the everyday athlete. We bring together healthcare providers, athletes, and dive deep into topics that matter most to runners. I'm Dr. Kate Mihevik-Edwards, physical therapist, author, athlete, and complete coffee addict.
And I'm Dr. Kacy Sinders, physical therapist, athlete, and pun expert extraordinaire. We're so passionate about changing running culture to improve the health, wellness, and fulfillment of our endurance athlete community. And we hope that these conversations inspire you to focus on putting your health first so that performance and PRs can follow. Now let's get to the show.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to More Than Miles. Kate and I have a very special guest this week. I know we say that every week, but truly, this one's a really special and near and dear to my heart because we have my very good friend, Coral Owen, on the show. Coral and I met in college, and we both competed on the University of Florida Triathlon team, also called the Tri-Gators, or we just always called it Tri-Gators. And she's always been someone I looked up to, and we've got plenty of college stories that may or may not make it into the podcast. We'll see. But anyway, Coral, thank you so much for coming on today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join y'all and talk with you today. I'm really looking forward to digging into some conversation threads and perhaps some historical anecdotes too, Kacy.
It's inevitable, I think, at this point.
I think so.
That's funny. Well, we were talking about earlier, thank you for being such a gracious guest as well, because we tried to have you on earlier and we had to cancel last minute because I got called to school when my son put a pencil in his eye, which is quite lovely.
How old's your son, Kate?
Yeah, he's old enough where there should be no pencil in his eye. He's 10. So that was a moment. And I felt so bad because I knew how excited Kacy was to have you. And because of that, I'm excited to really get to talk to you and get to know you a little bit.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we have to start at the beginning. So we always like to hear people's athletic journey, whether that be in running or not. And of course, how you got to where you are in the sport universe today. So can you take us back through your athletic background?
Sure. Yeah. So trying to think of the best place to start. Probably grew up primarily a swimmer. I realized pretty early on that jumping sports are not my forte. Stuck with the swimming, and I had the opportunity so I'm just, for context, I'm very squarely in the endurance space and triathlon space these days. But in my younger years as a kiddo, I would go to races and watch my mom and dad compete here in the Tampa Bay area, which is where I'm currently located, but had zero interest in doing a triathlon myself. Being a swimmer by background, running felt very intimidating, non-intuitive, and just something that I really didn't have a whole lot of desire, because I think I also felt like I didn't have a strong skill set there. So it was just like extra non-approachable. Fast forward
How
to
I feel about swimming, actually. So
there's definitely a paradigm there. Kacy, I think you're hitting on that. Yeah, swimmers by and large find running to be a little bit extra, and vice versa. Runners come into the swimming space. It's a little bit of a challenge being an aquatic creature. So I appreciate that for sure. But let's see, it was about 2003. So I was just going into high school. There was a super sprint in St. Petersburg. It was an all women's event. So that my mom kind of brought this opportunity up to me and was like, hey, like, I know you've thought about triathlon, but it felt like a really intimidating space. Like, what do you think about doing this? So I actually did my first triathlon in 2003 at an all-women's event with my mom, and I grinned my face off the entire way. It was just something that I didn't realize what an impactful moment it was at the time, and y'all will figure out why here in just a second. But it really just totally shifted my perspective on how sport can, just like what an empowering vehicle it is. Smile my face off through the run, which was something I would have never have done, like a year prior. But having like just worked my way up to a whopping, it sounds very minor 2-mile run at the end of a, swim and a bike, I just felt like I could like run through a brick wall or do anything. So went on to, sorry, go ahead, Kate.
I was saying, I know that feeling. Once you get empowered to do something like that, all of a sudden everything seems possible.
Yeah, and it's like it can be like such a small inflection point, right? That just opens up like a whole new angle of what's possible. But yeah, so from there I did some age group, just local sprint tries in high school, and ended up going to University of Florida, and then that's where I met you, Kacy. Race collegiate club at UF, wasn't a NCAA sport at that time. Got real burnt out, got real injured several times over, during that period, but came back to the sport after a stint overseas, finding some love for long distance triathlon, endurance cycling, and now leading a all women's group of nearly 300 athletes here in Tampa Bay, and race directing a women's sprint triathlon and coaching, and essentially my full-time job at this point. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
This makes me smile so big because obviously Tampa Bay being my hometown, I love seeing that my hometown have someone like you to foster that community and to do what you're doing there. Yeah, I mean, beyond seeing the Instagram stories, I'm like, oh, it's Clearwater Beach, I miss home, I love seeing the impact that you've been having back home.
Thank you.
Well, Coral, there were a couple things that you said that really caught my attention just now. So I really want to dive into them a little bit. And the first being this idea of a sport that you're not used to or maybe not good at, not being approachable. And so you mentioned that, you're a swimmer and you felt like running wasn't approachable to you. What was it that changed that for you? Not just the triathlon itself, but in general. What do you think the shift was, maybe in mindset or experience, that may have helped you with that change?
I think one of the first things was finding someone who also didn't feel like they had it all figured out. And she was my best girlfriend in high school. And it was one of those things where she was like, hey, I'm going to go run a half mile at the track. Do you want to come? And I just about fell over exhausted after, going out way too fast the first quarter mile. But just having someone that was like, let's be not great at this together. It felt less lonely. And I was like, okay, maybe we'll have fun while we're doing this. And then it really came down to as well, just figuring out over the course of a couple runs, being intuitive, because I think that's one thing that athletes are really good at is knowing your body. And so sort of adapting that swimmer's intuition of pacing and just kind of that biofeedback of okay, maybe if I go a little bit easier, I can make it a half mile instead of a quarter mile without, getting completely gassed. And just, through that evolution of learning that you can moderate effort and make it more approachable and sustainable, and then subsequently turning it into more of a learning process. And this is something that I really lean into very heavily these days too, both myself. We talk about current adventures at some point, hopefully in our conversation, but also with the athletes that I work with, is this idea of the power of yet. It's a Sesame Street episode actually as well. Yeah, it's called The Power of Yet.
I love it.
And it's just this whole idea of I'm not, I haven't mastered this yet, and just sort of that there's this open-ended opportunities, kind of based mindset of you can progress and learn. You just have to stick with it and fail forward and iterate and just try new things, and being okay with that you haven't gotten it yet, really changed that whole experience for me.
I love that perspective. I read something last night, actually, in a book that I'm reading that I can't remember. Of course, I won't remember the quote now, but it was something along those lines of just because you haven't gotten to where you think you should be yet doesn't mean you're not going to get there. I mean, that was the general. And I think that's so valuable, especially with athletes. And I'm sure that mindset helps your athletes so very much.
I would totally agree with that.
Yeah, it's like the Lexi Pappas quote, good thing I haven't reached all my goals, because then what would I do tomorrow, right?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, goodness. She's just a trove of those nuggets, right? That's
Mhm.
such a great one.
Yeah, absolutely. So Coral, tell us a little bit about your kind of burnout period. So what
Mm,
happened there, and then what eventually brought you back into the sport?
yeah. So there have been a couple different periods. The first one was post, so I did undergrad and grad school at UF in the span of about 4.5 years. So, full tilt boogie with studying, of course, but also racing with trigators. And this is not a knock on how collegiate club sports are set up, but I think it just speaks to the opportunity. Being in Florida, you can race year round. So at that point in time, collegiate club circuit was fall to spring semester. And then I was off of school, working beach patrol in Sarasota County. So like you're training for your job. And there are also a ton of local triathlons. I was like, cool, I'll just race even more. So I did that for several years, stacked one on top of the other and through, managing plantar fasciitis and several pretty wild stress fractures and just all of this stuff. I was just like, just done. More from a mental side than physical, I think. I just needed something kind of fresh. And so at that point in time, I had also moved overseas to Pisa, Italy for a host of reasons, but just got into a couple different spaces. But I really found myself missing the community that triathlon specifically offered. Endurance sports in general have wonderful people culture, but I really loved like triathletes are my people for just very approachable, very welcoming by and large. So when I moved back to the States, at that time it was in Illinois, um, in 2015, found local triathlon club, got back into it. So that was like my big hiatus for about 3 years when I was overseas. Just taking a step away, but coming back to the States about 10 years ago, and just re-engaging with that triathlon community. It was just kind of just it reignited my love for endurance sport and doing things now as a fully fledged adult and just finding that iteration and interaction with triathlon in a little bit different space than being so focused in on it 24/7, like living and breathing it in the collegiate space. I think it helped me moderate the intensity a little bit.
Yeah, the community is great. And for everyone's reference back home, wherever you happen to be listening to this, I guess, we raced roughly four, sometimes five with like a bonus race times a semester. And so those were a collection usually of sprint and Olympic distance triathlons. So there were a lot of opportunities. And so it was easy to get carried away. And but our team culture was really great. For me, it was my entire college experience, and I wouldn't change anything about it. We would have swim practice on Friday nights, and then we always went out to dinner. Like not the whole group, but a big group of us would go out to dinner that night. And so the people in the community, I think, is one of the best parts of the sport, and something that'll keep you coming back despite some of the challenges that the sport can present as well.
And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what you learned from the burnout. Again, this is kind of something that you probably use with your clients, and I know we talk about with ours all of the time. So burnout is a number of things, and it can be caused for different reasons for different people. And it sounds like part of what yours was a lot all at once and really intense, and then you took a step away. But what did you learn from that about yourself and burnout in general?
Yeah, so what did I personally learn is that for me, for myself, I cannot be solely under one identity and go full bore into that one identity. I'm I have a lot of diverse interests. And so again, balancing out this like multifaceted, uh, you know, sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Like kaleidoscope of identities as a human that makes me feel well-rounded and fulfilled in multiple areas to solely go in 100%. And I'm not saying like I don't go 100% towards the things I love, but like only doing that in one direction, it neglects these other aspects that enrich me and fill my cup. So I realized that that's just not good for over a long period of time. It leaves me feeling a little bit stale and not wholly fulfilled. And so walking that or kind of expanding that towards how I now interface with other athletes who are kind of navigating this, like see it a lot, like in, folks that do Ironman. I'm an Ironman triathlete. Like that's a beautiful, wonderful identity if it serves you. But when it becomes like the only thing, and you feel compelled to carry forward with that identity and doing things that uphold that identity that no longer serve you, that's when it becomes a friction point rather than a fulfilling point. And so helping folks recalibrate, if you will, and manage their stress bucket, like making sure that we're not neglecting, who are you as a human, just as a person, but also making sure that we're showing up with full energy and passion and love and care in the other areas of life that fulfill us and the people around us that we care for, whether that is professionally, personally, family, what have you. I think that's really what it comes down to, is tending to the sustainability of the entire journey.
Yeah, that is a huge topic. I actually just read 2 articles last week about athletic identity because I just submitted a TED Talk about it.
So cool.
And I was reading the articles, and one of the things that they say is that athletes that have a really strong athletic identity, it can be really great for performance and pushing them towards their goals. But on the flip side, those same athletes are more likely to be depressed and anxious, and they're more likely to neglect everything else in their life, not just this. So they will put all their time and energy on their sport, but they'll neglect work or they'll neglect relationships and other things. And so one of the things that I always talk about is making sure that you have enough tools in your toolbox, so that if you were to lose what you love, or if you become burnt out because of it, then you have something else to fall back on. And the way that you said it, it sounds like that's exactly how you live and approach your life now, is having multiple things that I would say in my toolbox. You said something different. So that you don't get caught up in just that identity. And I think it's such a powerful lesson for athletes to learn, especially if they really love what they're doing.
I would totally agree with that. And it's something that I think sometimes we can't necessarily navigate that until we're like in it, right? And then you kind of all of a sudden one day, this, again, just speaking from my own experience and those I've borne witness to and supported through this process, is you kind of look up, pull your head out of the sand one day and kind of look around. You're like, wait, how did I get here? And then, either walking it back or kind of figuring out like, what does the path forward look like? It can be a process. And there is a lot of sort of soul searching sometimes that folks have to go through. And it can be hard.
It's
really hard.
Really hard.
Especially if, again, you have anchored yourself to this identity that brings you worth or validation, building out your toolkit or your identity kaleidoscope, however you want to look at it, to what areas are you passionate about and bring you validation, or can you find expertise at any number of things. But yeah,
that's really cool. Kacy was right. I like you, Coral.
Thanks. I like y'all too. Come on, Kate. I would never lead you astray. You know that.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of those things where you don't read it. You can read it in a book, but until you're, in it, and it's something you have to figure out for yourself. Unfortunately, when you're there, there's not one of those lessons that you can just, learn sort of from afar. And I think it's an important one, and things get so much better afterwards. So I think it kind of speaks to that. You have to go through the hard things sometimes to get to the other side. And so this reminds me something of something that you posted. This has been a while ago now, Coral, and this really struck me originally when we had this podcast scheduled. And I was so excited to talk to you about it. But it fits perfectly with what our discussion is right now. And you're posing this question of, can performance and joy coexist when training for triathlon or whatever sport it might be? And so can you talk a little bit about what that video said? How do you work with your athletes in striking that balance?
Thank you. That was something that came out of a lot of the things I share, via our social media platforms, whether it's Instagram or Facebook page or within the community group we have on Facebook. A lot of those things come out of conversations that I have with athletes, and it's weird. Like a lot of times they're thematic, like I'll have the same conversation randomly with several people in the same week or time span. And that was something that really cropped up as a theme. And I forget specifically what was happening around that time, but it crystallized for me that this is one of our core principles for Team Babe, which is be a badass every day, is that how do we find that intersection of joy and performance? Because that's where we operate. Again, getting too far in any direction, particularly in the performance side, we tend to cast off some of these elements, I think, of fun and joy and adventure and exploration and curiosity, to go all in. And if we hone in too much on a finish time or a finish line goal, and I'm, again, not saying that there's not space for that or those are not worthy ambitions, but can we square that and really travel forward at this intersection where we are squaring performance with joy and maintaining curiosity and adventure and like all of these other things, that I think bring a more holistic experience, and create space for interfacing with sport, whatever your chosen avenue is, in a lot more well-rounded way, and one that can also capture like community and celebration and like all of these things that I think multi-sport and triathlon, or whatever sport too, can be anything really, are very worthy things of celebration, and also very worthy vehicles to arriving in spaces of joy as well, while still pursuing some cool, kind of metric heavy goals if you so desire.
Right. So so let's say an athlete comes to you, right, and they're like, Coral, I was 5 seconds off all my splits today. I'm not going to be ready for, my race. I'm not going to hit this goal. And they're getting really bogged down by it, right? So what are some strategies you can have that athlete do, or what would you suggest to them if you feel like they are getting too kind of in the weeds with the time performance goal?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And we're kind of arriving at a space in the season now, going into fall, where I have been having these conversations with some athletes that are kind of on the pointy end of things, if you will. And this happens I also want to just say, like, this conversation space also is very valid and happens with mid-pack and back of the pack athletes who are competitive, in their spaces. And so this is not just for elite athletes as well. So regardless of what pace folks are showing up with, when we have these very metric heavy concerns, one of the first things I'll do, and this may sound a little wild, is I'll tell that athlete to take their watch off.
Or put How dare you?
No, it's my favorite thing to tell people. I think it's a great idea. And I used to hate doing it myself, but when you finally do, it gives you such a sense of freedom.
100%. And, I think part of that leaning it, because, right, let me just kind of round this out. What does that do? It lets you listen to yourself. I think I'm going to go a little old school here, but, as I got into triathlon in the early 2000s, we didn't have smartwatches or all of this data at our fingertips. I remember the first time I ever wore a heart rate monitor was deep into my collegiate experience. And I was like, whoa, what do I do with all this? We didn't have even at that point, pace or GPS or anything like that. And so I think athletes that have been in a space like that develop and cultivate early on, and are able to subsequently lean into this intuition and just this personal reflection, trusting what is your body telling you? What is your brain telling you? A lot of folks that have gotten into multi-sport endurance, et cetera, in the last 5 to 10 years, where this tech is much more accessible. I think this is not a broad sweeping statement. None of these things I say are, but in large part, I think it's very easy to think, oh, because everyone's talking about it, I need a smartwatch. I need all of this tech to tell me how I'm doing. And we miss this opportunity to lean into how we're feeling. And so being able to square the data feedback with how you're feeling, what your body's telling you, and your own intuition, that's a really great place to start when folks start having these kind of anxiety, data-driven concerns. So take your watch off. That's a good one.
I think that we should pull out the quote. You don't need about how you using your technology to tell you how you're doing rather than listening to how you're feeling. I mean, that is such a piece of gold for any athlete out there. God, I remember when my running partner took her watch off and I was like, no, you are not.
The horror.
She qualified for Boston before me. And I was like, she took her watch out and qualified for Boston before me. I should stop wearing my watch.
I'm going to take my watch off.
I remember the whole thing very vividly, and it was terrifying. And I think, and when I started running and doing triathlon, I definitely didn't have a lot of tech, but as soon as you start using it, you get so used to it and pulled in that it is very hard not to become so reliant on it and miss all your body cues.
Yeah, I had a Timex and Map My Run and a pace calculator. And that's how
I forgot about the pace calculator.
Yeah, because I knew a few marks on the Pinellas Trail, which Coral will be familiar with.
Oh yeah,
my house, and so I kind of knew those memorized. I would go in and I would type it into my pace calculator, or if I was going to do like a spicy new route, I routed it out, and then when I came home, I would put it in the pace calculator, and that's how I. So I had no idea what, while I was running, but I mean, so I had one when I first started running, I knew 3 miles out. So a mile and a half out, mile and a half back. And of course, early in the sport, I wanted to do that route faster and faster every single time. Right.
Yeah.
Not healthy, right? But I can't tell you how exciting that was for me. Yeah. Right. And like how much joy there was coming back to be like, oh, I ran 10 seconds faster this time. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's something to that we just have so much available, maybe too much available to us nowadays.
Well, you said something interesting, Kacy, is looking at how much joy, when we're talking about this idea of joy, right? So how much joy you got from beating your own time over and over again, and while you were starting out. And I remember I had that same experience, and I don't know if you did too, Coral. But then as we progress in our sport and as we start to really mature in our sport, we do have to work a little bit harder, don't we, to find the pieces of joy along the way, because you can only improve your time so much once you kind of hit a spot and you're tuned in on recovery and nutrition and all the things. So what else besides, those times bring you joy? It's a really interesting thing.
I don't think many people hold space to ponder those things and reflect. But it's something, I try to cultivate for myself, but also hold space for our community and the athletes I have the privilege of working with. I think there are some cool opportunities being in multi-sport to be a beginner and be a student of the sport again, to re-energize. Like, I'll just use myself as an example. After being in triathlon for better part of 2 decades, I don't have the time. I have a 2-year-old, and I run my own business, and I'm a solo parent. There's a lot of stuff going on. So to chase, to stay in triathlon and chase a time goal, I just don't have the bandwidth to do it the way that I'd like to. And so for me, being a student of ultra trail, that's a space I'm moving into right now and figuring out the ups and downs of all of that. Yeah, never say never.
It's a totally different thing, isn't it?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So it's been really cool to, I'm meeting new people who are already in this space, like, meeting up with different training buddies, doing some solo adventures. We've got a really cool urban trail network here in Dunedin where I live. So having some more like solo adventures and me time has been really cool. Seeing new routes, being in nature, pushing my body to some longer distances for me. And, just doing things differently and kind of charting a new course. Like that's a really cool way to find that space. I already spoke to like this aspect of community, meeting new people, and I think also celebrating where other people are in their journey, helping beginners. Like that's a really great way too. Like have you been in the sport for a while? I've got an amazing athlete that I've been working with for a little while up in Charleston. She was a triathlon mentor for the, oh geez. If I remember the name of the program, I'll have to drop it because it's fantastic. It's a all women led mentorship group for experienced triathletes mentoring gals that are just getting started in the sport, and they just did their triathlon this past weekend. But she talked about how energizing that was. Her name's Melissa. Melissa talked about how energizing it was to help people get into the sport and feel confident, like celebrating their wins. It feels very close and near and dear to your heart and can help you remember why you got into sport in the first place. So just that was a very mixed bag response, but there's so many places we can explore and re-engage with joy, and it doesn't look any which way in particular.
I love that, and I don't think it matters what kind of athlete you are, that you can take that advice and that kind of nugget with you anywhere, because all athletes, no matter who they are, what they do, will experience some sort of this kind of monotony at some point and need to kind of look back into, why am I even doing this? Is it fun anymore?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, are you training for a trail race? Yeah.
Did you hear how she said that?
What's happening?
I guess I kind of cracked that nut open for myself, didn't I? So yeah, actually, Kacy, our mutual friend, Britt Bertner.
Our amazing friend, Britt Bertner. Shout out to Britt.
Shout out to Britt. Britt actually just came on to our Team Babe coaching squad as a trail and ultra and also high performance triathlon coach. So Britt progressed. So she's one of my dear friends from Tri-Gator days. She moved to the Keys after we all finished graduate school, and for probably about the last decade has kind of been living more squarely in the trail and ultra space while living in the Florida Keys of all things. So I've been able to crew Britt for a race called Death at Dupuy, which is a last man standing event on the southeast side of Lake Okeechobee the last few years. Love my appointment as snack captain. I will wear that hat till the cows come home. Every single time I was down there, I'm like, this is not for me, but I love this for y'all. And it was great to see. So just as a footnote, for anybody who's not heard of a last man standing event or last person standing event, the typical format is it can be road or trail. Typically it's more trail based, but it's a 4.2-ish mile loop every hour on the hour. And it's a race of attrition. So you do that loop however long it takes you, and then you've got the balance of that hour to regroup, deeper into the race. Folks that are making it 24 hours plus are grabbing a maybe 2 or 3 minute nap. And then just before the top of the next hour, everybody lines up in the starting corral and you do it again over and over and over again until there's one person left. I do not plan on being that one person, but my goal is to make it 12 yards, as they call them, which should add up to about 50 miles, which is far beyond anything I've ever done in the running space.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of fun.
I'm not sure I would call it fun. Crazy fun.
It
sounds great.
Yeah, good thing we have the video for that reaction.
That's right. Okay, I have to mention two things that have come up throughout this conversation. One is real quick. I have to ask about the name Tri-Gators, by the way, guys, because it just feels a really bad idea. Like all I can think about is swimming in actual gators. Remember, I'm not from Florida, so like the name to me gives me this visceral reaction. Like what is this Tri-Gators? Is it just because you're the Florida Gator? I don't understand.
Yeah, I mean that's basically it. We were the Florida Gators Triathlon Club, and that's kind of how all of them, like the Miami, they were the Tri-Canes, and FSU was the Tri-Noles. So it was just
Got it.
kind of a theme within. I don't know if it was only within Florida. I'm sure. I think this was the case maybe across the country. The other schools that we raced against. But yeah, it was just it's just. I mean, I'm not saying we didn't swim in waters that potentially had gators.
That's what I'm saying. Like it just keeps the name. I don't think I could do it because I would keep thinking about possibility of gators.
Don't be first, don't be last.
Sorry, that just kept coming up. And every time you said it, I was like, ooh, I don't know. I can't hold this in anymore. So thank you for divulging. The other thing I wanted to ask about is it seems like from the very beginning, when your girlfriend brought you running and asked you if you wanted to come running around the track, to when you were doing your first all women's triathlon with your mom, to coaching all women's team, like there's this definite theme of uh, being with women and supporting women in your life and this kind of journey. And I'd like to dive into that a little bit more because I think that's an important thread to acknowledge.
Thanks. Yeah. So um, I think part of it is deeply rooted in the fact that so watching my mom race triathlon, of course, alongside my dad, both of whom were great triathletes in their own right. At the competitive level back then, there were not in so this was like mid 90s, early 2000s, right? There were not many women that participated in triathlon and raced in those events. I would say probably less than 10%. Now it's very different story, especially in the short course. So under 7.3, so like sprint, tri, Olympic tri, it's closer to 50. Come a long way in the last 15 years plus. But so that's one of the reasons why, seeing that progression and what women can do when they feel like they have representation. I mean, that's like the snowball effect that we've seen in this space is like, oh, wow, okay, other people can do this. Like my friend did it. Maybe I can do it too. I think that's kind of been the cumulative effect. And that's what I felt too when I did my first triathlon in 03, 14 years old. And I was like, whoa, this the vibe of this event it felt so much more welcoming. And that's not to say that other triathlons are not, but there is something really, really special about just the climate and the culture when we hold space for women to do hard things together. It's really powerful. So going on to my collegiate club experience, we had some great dudes on the team too, but we had this really strong, tight-knit group of gals that we would train and share lots of stories together and commiserate together, but sharing those miles like just really solidified those relationships. And like, I mean, Kacy, we've been friends for almost 15 years. Like,
Most, yeah.
yeah. And really that core group of women that I got to train and race with in college are still some of my closest people to this date. And like we'll go months without, touching base. And it's just like, if somebody reaches out, it's like no time has passed, which is super cool and like really rare. And so, now into what I'm currently up to, I started coaching triathlon about 10 years ago. Passion project was all web-based, had a small core group of about 10 ladies from US, Taiwan, Italy, since I was living there, just prior to that time that I got started. But it was just this really awesome crew. We called it the Johanna, and fast forward about 5 years from then, about 5 years also from current day, we rolled that into what is now Team Babe Athletics. We've now got, it's a Facebook community. We just cracked 500 people in this past week. Weekly in-person meetups on the weekends. We had 30 women race to sprint try this past weekend locally. Like, it is just, it's mind-blowing to see the level it's reached. I never envisioned it would be what it is. And I think we're kind of feel like we're just getting warmed up now, honestly. But just the connections that have come about, the friendships that have come about, the things that people have accomplished, and then the things that folks have been inspired to endeavor because they've seen what's possible for someone, maybe a couple rungs ahead of them on this ladder of adventure. They're dreaming bigger dreams for themselves too. And it's all happening in this really supportive space where you show up as yourself, whatever that looks like, endeavor whatever dreams you want to, and you're going to find celebration and hands to help you in whatever way possible. So
yeah. Congratulations. That is a
Thank
really
you.
big accomplishment.
Yeah, I'm like tearing up over here. Like, you have to be so proud, Coral, of what you created. Yeah, it's just, I mean, that's the great part about growing the group too, is that, yeah, now you have people along that spectrum so that everyone can feel welcome and find their tribe within the tribe, right? And yeah, just at the end of the day, it's all about creating the community that got us into the community, and kind of giving back to the sport in a way, which I think is really, really special. Okay, well, you already mentioned that a lot of what you've accomplished so far was beyond your wildest dreams, but any other big dreams that may have come about since accomplishing what you've already accomplished?
Yeah. So we've already secured, we're going to roll another edition of the Babes Tri for 2025, June 22nd. So just looking to grow that opportunity and that event of how many women we can support for that event. Just keep growing the community. There's some cool things in the works potentially for different training groups. We just launched the Trail and Ultra arm for our coaching support, so that's really exciting. Bring a couple other coaches on board to do some other big stuff and touch some areas of the triathlon community that I don't feel are very well represented. So can't share super fine details on that yet, but some really neat spaces that we're growing into. Couple of camps, like we're doing another women's open water swim camp coming up in March. So I think just, kind of doubling down on the things that we're doing well, expanding those opportunities, and then just, I think, being open to wherever, whatever comes our way, as far as great opportunities, partnerships, things like that. So
That's
going to be cool.
Great. Yeah, it sounds great, Coral. It sounds like you guys have a lot of really cool stuff coming up. And again, like, I'm really grateful that Kacy brought you on, because I think there's so many things that you said today that can be extrapolated across any sport, but definitely in the endurance community. And it's really been a great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Kacy. Always great to see you. And Kate, so nice to get to talk to you more in depth as well. I appreciate the opportunity to join you guys.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening today. We are so happy that you're here. If you enjoyed this conversation, share it with a friend. Even better, share it on social media, because sharing is caring. And the more people we can reach, the better.
Another way you can help us out is by leaving a review on Spotify or Apple Podcast. So give us those 5 stars and tell us how awesome we are. Really, we love to hear how awesome we are. To support our work financially, you can also join our Patreon squad at patreon.com/morethanmiles, where for a few dollars a month, you can help us keep the show going and growing.
This season is sponsored by Fast Bananas. Why buy multiple subscriptions made for everyone when you can have one specifically crafted for runners? Fast Bananas has online yoga classes, strength training programs, meditations, recipes, communities to ask questions, and so much more. Check out Fast Bananas at fastbananas.com or follow them on Instagram at fastbananasrun.
Don't forget that training is so much more than miles.